All right, so we're 5:05. I think we can start if you are ready, Alex.
Sure, I'd be delighted. So hi everyone, my name is Alex Conliffe, and I was a McGill engineering student in what I realize actually is kind of longer and longer ago now than I maybe care to remember, but it's a real pleasure to be joining today and just offering a few remarks and then introducing Charlene. So I started off a meeting this morning. I work now for the McCall McBain Foundation, and was starting my morning on a meeting with others who are doing work in climate change, which is one of our areas of work. And the person who started the meeting just kind of said, like, just want to acknowledge that we're kind of, we're living in a surreal time, right? We're living through a global pandemic, climate crisis, and a crisis of equality and social justice. And it's a lot. And it's helpful just to kind of take a deep breath, and acknowledge it's a lot. But it's also a great time for leadership, a great time for disruption, and actually a necessary time for both, which is why I'm just so excited to have the chance to join in this conversation today. And as I was kind of reflecting, what was on my mind when I was an engineering student and what was going on in the world back in 1999 at the dawn of the millennium, a little before you were born. And at that time, countries around the world were rallying around the Millennium Development Goals, which came before the Sustainable Development Goals. And for the first time, the world was really trying to focus its energy on a set of issues that really mattered. Extreme poverty, food insecurity, maternal and newborn mortality, really critical issues. And they seemed to matter tremendously. And it was obvious what doctors and nurses could do. It was obvious what economists and international development workers could do. But it was not very obvious what an 18-year-old engineering student could do to contribute to these, big problems, given that we were spending most of our time in lectures and working on problem sets and thinking about Stokes' theorem and things that seemed quite unconnected to this big global agenda out there in the world. But at that time, I was able to find a group of other engineering students who didn't want to wait on the sidelines, who didn't want to wait until someone told us that we were experts or that we knew enough to contribute. We wanted to participate and we wanted to do something then. And that really, for me, was a moment, I would say, when my leadership development journey started at McGill. That desire to contribute in some way and figure out what that looked like kind of became my calling. And it guided my extracurriculars, it guided how I oriented my summers, and ultimately, what I chose to do after I graduated. Our small group of engineering students kind of slowly became bigger and then became a national movement. And over time, we engaged together in deep learning. We were engaging in discussions that weren't happening necessarily in our classrooms around equality and global politics and how you think about societal and systemic change. And over time also started to figure out the ways that we could contribute, whether that was through advocacy within our universities or ultimately with the federal government, whether that was through how our problem-solving skills could contribute to tangible problems or issues in our university communities or overseas. And, in hindsight, I think that those one of the things that we were able to do was really awaken in engineering students a sense that they weren't just training to be technical, professionals or experts, but actually that we really were leaders who could contribute to problems that really mattered in the world. The challenges that we face today and the way that we understand them has evolved a lot since 1999, but the need for each of us to step up and to work on issues that matter hasn't changed. It's still there very much today. And I certainly think that we find ourselves happier when we figure out how to step up and how we figure out how to contribute. For some of us, it's kind of easy. We know what it is right away. And some of us, we don't know right away, and we stumble into it. The issues that I've worked on through my life in different ways in government, nonprofit sector, and now in philanthropy, I stumbled on primarily during my undergraduate studies, so issues of the environment, international development, and so forth. And, you know, part of it is sort of thinking to yourself, what makes me a little bit angry, or what gets me a little bit excited, and tugging on some of those strings and really trying to, you know, pursue that. I'm really delighted that Dean Nicell and the faculty really are invested in thinking about students at McGill as leaders, and really thinking about what it looks like to foster that journey and to support you in discovering your leadership trajectory. We've been working together on an initiative called Empower that really looks at what are the skills, what's the kind of self-awareness that we need, what are the experiential learning opportunities that we can participate in, and how do we make them available to more students so that you can invest in your own journey. I think that, you know, each of us will contribute differently and will bring different skill sets and perspectives, and that self-awareness is just so key. I think also that we're really good at celebrating the big wins, and we forget some of the hard work that really goes into that along the way. As I said, one of the things that I focus on now is on climate change, and I think about an event that happened in Montreal, you know, 500,000 people joining for a climate, you know, the climate march. Sort of mind-boggling to think that that happened not so long ago. And we think of that, and I think that Canadians from coast to coast to coast might be aware of that event. But actually, it was the many, many people who were doing things like managing email lists, sending out invites, setting up meetings, all of the things that don't look very sexy, but that really go into creating that change that matters so much, and that are part of what goes into really making change. So, without further ado, just some of my own reflections. I want to thank the Aberman family for their vision and their leadership in setting up this seminar. And now it's, you know, my real pleasure to introduce Charlene. Charlene has a phenomenal bio. I'm not going to mention all of it, but just a few sort of key points. So she's an expert on leadership, on looking into the future, and on digital transformation. She's the author of 6 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Open Leadership, co-author of the critically acclaimed Groundswell, and her latest bestseller is The Disruption Mindset. She's been named by Fast Company as one of the most creative people in business. And I understand, Charlene, that you were baking sourdough before the pandemic hit, and before it became this kind of like sense of therapy for all of us to, you know, make bread if we could even find flour on the shelves in the grocery stores. So Charlene is here today really to talk to us about how to be disruptive, and how to move from kind of like thinking about it and wanting to do it to actually just starting to do it. She's going to give us some ways to make disruption part of our everyday lives. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you for this opportunity to be speaking with you all. This is a topic of great passion for me. It's the idea of not just how to be disruptive, but how to lead and create disruption. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of these concepts today. I have a couple slides to just guide the conversation as we go along here. I encourage you to ask the questions. We have set aside a huge amount of time to be able to answer the questions, have a discussion. That is my favorite part of these meetings. It's not just sharing the thoughts and the research I've done, but also hearing how you are thinking about it, how you are taking it in and responding. What are your takeaways? So by all means, use the chat to ask questions, and Sam will be fielding those, and we'll have plenty of time again to look at those. All right, so let's talk about how disruption actually figures in our world. As Alex was saying, this is a very interesting and very tough time, but it's also a really amazing time. And the way I think about it is that disruption creates huge opportunities for change. The reality is the world has been turned upside down. The way that we relate to the world has been torn apart. And as we all saw in March, we were forced to do in 5 or 10 days to completely pivot. We were pushed to the very edges of that disruption. And we came out more or less okay from that. We formed new ways of working and communicating and connecting with each other. What it shows is that we have tremendous resilience, but it also shows that the needs that we had from before haven't gone away. They have definitely changed. They have shifted. And the opportunities are there now for us to be able to serve those new needs in new and different ways. Let me show you a chart that this is one of my favorite charts from the history. This is the gross domestic product of the United States over the past 50 years. And you can see during dips and rises, during those dips, they were fantastic times for innovation and business formation. Microsoft was formed in the midst of the 1970s oil crisis. CNN came out in the middle of in the early 80s. AutoNation in the early 1990s. Even iPod came out through the dot-com boom. And even in this last recession with the financial crisis, companies like Uber and Airbnb were born. In fact, here in the United States, what we're finding is that the rate of business formation is higher this year. In 2020, it is 43% higher than the previous year in 2019. And that says it's partly out of necessity because the jobs weren't there. So people were starting new businesses. But we're seeing so much innovation happening right now, so much entrepreneurship, because there is so much need that's out there. So the question that I raise for today is, how are you going to look at this disruption? There are two ways to be looking at it. You can think about it as you are being disrupted, meaning you're going to be having these waves of change and disruption hit you in the face, and it could knock you over. Or you can anticipate those waves. You can be the disruptor. You can be disruptive and create change and be able to formulate changes and shifts in a positive direction. Again, I see so many organizations, so many leaders right now saying, I'm just going to wait for the vaccine to take hold. We're going to wait until the fall for things to calm down before we make any big changes. It's just too messy, too disruptive right now. And what we have found in previous recessions and disruptions, those organizations are not ready. They're not taking advantage of all the opportunities that are being created. Instead, what we're seeing is a small number of companies, about 11%, 11 to 14% of companies are actually actively investing in these new areas, looking for those opportunities, looking for the needs that have shifted, and trying to anticipate where those customers are going to go. That is the way you are disruptive. It isn't some technology that's going to be the secret sauce, the magic bullet, the easy button to be able to make disruption happen. If there's one thing I've learned in 20 years of being a technology analyst, it's never about the technology. And I say that knowing that I'm speaking to a group of engineering students. It is about how we use these technologies to make a difference in people's lives. Think about Uber. It was just a mobile app. It didn't use any new technologies, but it was a combination of location services, mobile services, and a lot of heavy lifting to connect with riders and connect with drivers to create a new service that is changing our world. So when you think about being disrupted and how to be able to do this, the one advice I would give you, and I want to start this out, it's a little bit controversial, and that is, you may have had this advice, follow your passions in your life. And I think in some ways that is the worst advice you can get, because it promises that if you just do something that you love, that you're passionate about, it'll be easy. I don't know about you, but I have found work and pursuing the path that I've done to be extremely hard. And what happens is, if you follow your passions, when it does get hard, when the obstacles come in the way, you're thinking, this isn't very fun. This is not really my passion. This is a slog. And I can tell you, after having written all these books, it was not very fun, but I did it because of a different reason. And what I encourage you to think about as you're thinking, well, what kind of change, what kind of leader, what kind of career am I going to have? Don't follow your passions. Instead, think about, how am I going to serve the world? What kind of change could I create that would be useful? How can I be useful? And also in these areas, where can I be excellent in what I choose to do? As I was raising my kids with my husband, one of the things we often said to them, we just want two things for you. We want you to be happy, and we want you to be a contributing member of society. And so they understood that this is not just about following a passion, but when you are doing something where you feel you have a purpose, where you know you're creating service and you're being useful, making a difference, there is such satisfaction that that becomes your passion because you want to do more of it. I'll just give a little anecdote about this and how important I have found this in my own life. Back in January, I was at a networking meeting of other leadership leaders and coaches. And one woman came up to me and asked me, not the standard cocktail party questions of, so where do you live? What do you do? Instead, she began the conversation by asking this one very thought-provoking question. So, how do you serve the world? And I was taken aback because I have a purpose statement. My purpose is to help leaders and organizations thrive with disruption, but it wasn't the center of how I thought about myself, how I expressed myself. And from that day forward, I said, this is my purpose. I'm going to wake up every morning thinking, how am I going to serve the world? And if I didn't know quite how, I would really center back onto that purpose statement. And when the pandemic hit, it hit me like a tsunami. I was just knocked off my feet. For about 2 weeks, I was just frozen in grief and fear and just really bemoaning the state of our world. I could just see how terrible this was going to be. And the thing that got me out of bed every single day was repeating that purpose to help leaders thrive with disruption and asking my question, how am I going to serve the world today? And in little steps, over and over again, repeating that helped me find and center on that purpose to give me the energy to come back and engage with the world. And so when you're thinking about how you want to formulate your career, think about what you want to do in the world. Instead of thinking about how you're going to the career in large expanses, think about it just in terms of the change you think you want to create, the change that you believe that the world needs. How will you serve the world? And that's how you can become disruptive. When I speak to disruptive leaders, they don't talk about passions. They talk about the change, the impact, how they believe what they're trying to do is going to make the world a better place. It sounds kind of cliche, but they truly, truly do mean it. And they're passionate about that purpose that they have. So I want to talk about how many disruptive organizations do this. And that is they really focus again on solving these customer problems. But in particular, what they're doing is they're thinking about the future problems, not just the ones that are today. And this is the secret sauce that disruptive leaders do. And I know that there are quite a few hockey fans out there because we're talking, hockey here. And we know Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player ever, he had this saying, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck will be. And that is, you can get to that puck faster and better than anybody else. That's how you are disruptive. When I look at disruptive organizations and their leaders, they are always looking to the future. They may be operating today, but what they're doing is, I'm going to serve my customers today, but I'm going to gear everything that I have to these needs in the future. So let me give you an example of that. This is an example from a software company called Adobe. Some of you may be very familiar with it. They make a lot of creative software. The Creative Suite is their flagship product. And back in 2010, they were having a problem. They were just coming out of the financial recession. And they realized the world was becoming more connected, in that the world was becoming more collaborative, going onto mobile devices, and their software sat on CD-ROMs in packaged software. So they knew they needed to move into the cloud. But that meant they had to do everything differently. They had to sell differently, no longer taking money up front, but now actually taking a subscription. They would have to market differently. Their website would actually become the product. And they also knew they were going to lose a lot of money. In fact, they were going to lose money for 2 years. And as a publicly traded company, that was going to be really hard for their shareholders to swallow. But they said, this is what the future demands. This is what our future really needs to have. And we know customers need this, even if they say they're perfectly happy with this software product on CD-ROMs. In fact, they didn't want this at all. They were signing petitions saying, go back. We don't want this future. We want to stay with the product that we know and love. So no customers were asking for it. It was going to be a huge change for the organization. And finally, they were going to lose money, a lot of money. So why did they do this? They absolutely believed in this future. So they prepared it, they got ready for it. And let me just show you what they did, because it was fascinating from a financial point of view, what happened. So this is an index looking back to when they first announced this change back in 2011. And so this is an index line that shows what their revenues did. It looked about the same, but if you look at their income, it went up for the first year and then completely tanked in the second year, right on time. This is exactly what they anticipated and what the CFO basically went to Wall Street and said. So in Q1 of 2013, the CFO went to Wall Street and said, look, our strategy is working. People are switching from packaged software to the cloud, and we're losing tons of money. Isn't this fantastic? Now you look at this and nobody in the right mind would think that this is fantastic, but because they could paint such a great and compelling picture of what this future customer looked like, this is what the stock market did. It went up and it continued to go up as they lost more and more money. Eventually, it evened out after those 2 years. And now their stock price is over 10 times where they are. And they have a huge customer base, much bigger than they could before. Now they, instead of having an entry price of $800, it's $10 a month for Photoshop. Completely transformed the organization. But it took the organization and the leadership in particular to turn their back, almost completely turn their back on these existing customers, to take this really hard path into the future and to disrupt themselves. The key thing that they had to do is they had to make sure they weren't blinded by their beautiful, profitable customers. Because if they had served their customers really, really well, again, we hear this idea that we need to understand our customers and do everything possible for them. But that may not be necessarily true, because if it's your current customers that you're only serving and you never look at your future customers, you're never going to point to the future and look for those changes. You'll never embark on this really difficult journey to look for that future. So when I think about this, the key thing for Adobe was leadership. Their leadership identified what this need was and never deviated from that. They never blinked in the face of tremendous obstacles, in the face of hundreds of thousands of people complaining about their product and how they wanted to go back to it. And so I want to talk about leadership, because when we think about leaders, we oftentimes think about the leaders that we've had the privilege of working with. So think about the leaders you have seen and the people that you have worked with, and pull up your chat. I'm going to pull up mine too as well. And what I'd like you to do is think about that leader and think about how they made you feel, not what they did or what they said, but think about how they made you feel. And then type into the chat just one word to encapsulate what that word would be. So love to see some chat activity here. I think people have access to it. So I'll give you an example of how one leader, how that made me feel. They made me feel limitless. This leader believed in me, even though I was in my very first job out of college. He thought that I had potential, and he kept putting me into situations where I was bound to fail. And oftentimes I fell flat on my face. And yet he picked me up, dusted me off, and goes, so what did you learn from that? And I went, well, I learned not to do that again. He goes, great, don't do that again. but he goes, you have so much potential. It's limitless what you could do. So here are some great words we have here. We have trusted, supported, reliable, capable, necessary to the cause. That's great. Trusted me, caring, empowered. These are such powerful words. Hopeful. So thank you so much for sharing those words. And those words are powerful because in so many ways, this is what we want to be as leaders. We want to create that feeling in the people that we are leading. So you may be early in your leadership journey, but you're a leader already. And for you to have experience on the side of being a follower, what it means to be led well, you now are going to take that experience and say, this is how I want to be a leader too as well. And think about leadership in this way. It is not a title. It is simply a relationship between people who aspire to create change and people who choose to follow them, who are inspired to follow them. And that's all it is. And I get asked so many times by people, well, when I'm a leader, I'm going to do these. So how do I become a leader? And I wonder if I were to go around and ask all of you and to say, how many of you think you see yourself as leaders? How many of you would raise your hands? And I would hope by the end of this talk, by the end of this time together, that you will raise your hand and see yourself as a leader. Because this is the key. A leader is simply somebody who wants to create change. If you're not creating change, then you're not a leader. You're a manager. And what I do believe is that you don't need to have a title to be a leader. You just need to want to create that change. So what change could you see that you think you could make a change around? It could be in your community, it could be in your classroom, it could be with your friends, it could be larger in thinking about a longer term area. I would encourage you to look for those opportunities to lead right in the places where you are. Lead from the place that you are today and look around. I guarantee you, there are so many problems in this world that need to be addressed. Alex talked about the climate. What are the things that we can do just in our neighborhoods, in our community, in our homes, in our schools to create that change? It's the little steps that matter. One person I know said, we use a lot of styrofoam cups in my office. I saw some extra mugs in the marketing department in the closet. Can I just go and get those and replace those styrofoam cups? Little changes really make a difference. But what happens is when you make those little changes, it builds your confidence to take on bigger challenges, to take on bigger change. You don't get to do the big changes until you build up that experience and in particular, build up that confidence. So I want to talk a little bit about how that actually manifests itself in disruption. What I have found is that disruptions require a very specific part of leadership, and that is to create a movement. And I love this picture of Martin Luther King Jr. because it's a picture of him giving his famous I Have a Dream speech. But instead of seeing that iconic view of him being silhouetted with the Lincoln Memorial behind him, this is his view. And you can see what task that he had at that moment. He was giving his speech, the last speech of the day, of a long, hot day in August. And he was realizing that his speech wasn't going very well. And so he's going through his speech, trying to think about what to say, because he literally threw his prepared speech to the side and was speaking extemporaneously. He said, go back to Detroit, go back to Mississippi, go back and ring the bells of freedom. And then from the side, someone said to him and called up to him and said, Martin, tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream. And that's when he began his famous speech. I have a dream. And he painted this picture. He painted a future that we could believe in and hang on to during the deepest, darkest days of the civil rights movement. And that's what leaders do. When you want to create change, difficult change, you need to create that vision of what that future is, because it needs to sustain and be manifest in other people around you, the people that you are leading, because you can't always be there. And when they find the tough times around them, they need to remember what that future is that they're building towards. I love this quote from this wonderful book called The New Power. And they say, it's only a movement if it moves without you. And that's the truest version of disruptive leadership. in that you can sustain this movement, and it creates a life of its own. Now, in my research, what I found is that there are very specific different types of leaders. And so I want to do a poll here. And this is an interactive poll. So you can do it on your laptop, you can do it on your phone. And the question becomes, how disruptive do you see yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? Right? So this is the survey itself. What you will do is go to menti.com. So go to menti.com, menti.com, and use the code 5264884. And you'll see this poll show up. And then you can move the slider back and forth between 1 being you don't like change at all. You like things being the same every single day, versus you see yourself as being extremely disruptive. And fingers crossed, the numbers are going to show up magically on the screen. So let's see how that works. So take that poll. And let me explain to you how this scale works. Now, not everybody's going to be a 10. In fact, I don't meet very many 10s. I don't even consider myself a 10. I consider myself like a 7 or an 8. And the goal here isn't to be a 10, because you could be a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. But if your organization is a 2, then you're killing it. By the same measure, you could be an 8, but if your organization is like a 9 or a 10, then you're falling behind. You're the laggard. So when I think about all of these different scales that you have, one of the ways to think about this is, are you at the level of disruption that you think you need to be to create the kind of change that you want to have? And then think about the people around you. Are they at the same levels of disruption? If you're working on a team, this might be a really good thing to ask. So where do you see yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you're really different numbers, then you may have to, if you're on the higher end and other people on your team are at the lower end, then you may have to slow things down in order to bring these people up. Vice versa, if people are going way too fast for you, you need to let them know you need more time to deliberate and to figure out how things are going to pull together. All right, let's see what's going on with this. I can see that the score, I have another screen here that I can see it. Let me just try one thing real quick. And yes, it is stuck. This is technology at its best. So I can't show it there, but I'm seeing, here we go. All right, it just took a little while. You can see the distribution here. We have some people right smack in the middle, 5.7, which is exactly where I anticipated it to be. The average for North America is a 5.6, so right there. But you also see this curve at the very end. There's a lot of 7, 8s, and 9s over there. And again, some people are at the lower end too. You see this distribution across the board. We see a lot of different people on different teams. And it's not, again, the goal to be 10, but to understand how you are disruptive relative to the team members that you have. This is extremely important, and you can see all the scores there. So this is extremely important because one of the key measures, and I'm trying to move my slides forwards here, is when you look at that disruption score, in the way I've worked with leaders, is that there tend to be 4 different types of leaders in organizations. The most disruptive ones are ones who have an openness to change mindset, and they also have leadership behaviors that inspire people to and empower people. These realist optimists that are high in both tend to be about a quarter of people in organizations, and they have a very high leadership disruption score. We have agent provocateurs who may be really open to change, but they're not necessarily great at making the change happen in leadership. These are a lot of my Silicon Valley friends who get up on stages and say, disrupt or die. They wave their hands and say a lot, but they don't know actually how to do this. Those people partner with the steadfast managers, people who are really good managers, but not necessarily comfortable with change, to get that change done. And my favorite persona and archetype are the worried skeptics. These are the people who look at change and look at the changes ahead and just go, I can just see everything that's going to go wrong. And I love those people because we need people like them, because they can put in all the contingency plans. They can look around the corners and anticipate things that go wrong. And inevitably, things do go wrong. So as long as they believe in that vision of where the future is going to be, they can play a very important role in putting together those contingency plans. Now, there's one thing I do want to share with you, is that as going through all of this research, I found a distinct gender gap in this. There was a disruption gender gap. And I'll just use the example of the realist optimist, the most disruptive archetype group here. You can see that for men and women, you can have the exact same scores on a scale of 1 to 5 for openness to change mindset and the leadership behaviors. But the disruption quotient was significantly lower across every single one of these archetypes for women as opposed to men. There are many reasons why this is, but if you have ever been the only in the room, the only woman of color, the only person of color, the person from a different socioeconomic class, even if you just feel different in some way, you're using all of your energy to stay and be in that room. When you're using your energy to do that, to feel like you belong, to feel like you're included, it's really difficult to raise your hand and be the outlier, to be the disruptor. And I say this because it takes special effort to do things like diversity and inclusion and equity, big, important ideas right now. And we can't just do this by accident or by just assuming it'll happen. It needs to be done intentionally. So if we want to be the best disruptive selves, we want to be the best disruptive teams, we need to think actively about how we can make every single person comfortable being that disruptor, to have that potential, to raise their hand, to be the outlier, and to take special attention to people who may feel like they're on the outskirts of that group, of that tribe. So one of the last areas I want to talk about today is really around how do you create a culture, because culture is simply about how you get work done. And if you're going to be disruptive and try to move fast, you're going to have to focus on your beliefs and your behaviors. And what I found is in disruptive organizations, there are 3 key beliefs that leaders and their cultures have. There's a general sense that there's openness and sharing of information and decisions, in that things are really shrunk down and collapsed in terms of that power and hierarchies. Because when you have things that are open, when things are being shared, when things are being transparent, it creates accountability. There's no place to hide. There's no guessing what's really somebody trying to do over there. What are really their intentions? It's all out in the open. And that also is coupled to this idea of agency. And agency is the idea that you were imbued with the power and the ability to make decisions because you have openness, you know what the decisions are, you know what your role is in executing that strategy. This is very different than in being empowered. Empowered says, I have power from somebody who's given it to me from over there, or I'm waiting to be empowered by somebody of authority and power. Agency says, I don't need to wait for anybody. I already had it just by walking in the door and having the information available to me. And the third belief is that we have a bias for action. We believe that the future is moving further and further away from us. And so we need to take action as soon as possible. As soon as we have the minimally viable data to make a decision, we're going to make a decision. We're not going to wait for it to be perfect. These beliefs are fundamental to the way that disruptive leaders and organizations think. It's very different than the way most organizations think. And I know that many of you have been going through so many changes because of everything that's been happening over the past year. And we can anticipate this requiring even more. So think about this. What beliefs hold you back? What beliefs do you say to yourself that holds you back from being more open, from having agency, from a bias to action? And this is, I just took a few examples of the things that I've heard from people. And these are people from all ages and walks of life. Some people say, I'm not seen as a leader, even though they have a leadership title. I was speaking to a woman who had been promoted to chief of staff. She had been an administrative assistant before, but now she had the title chief of staff to the top executives in the organization. And she still felt like she wasn't a leader. And I go, well, you have a title. This is a time for you to say, well, what does it mean to be a chief of staff? What change do you think is needed? Why are you waiting for somebody else to tell you what change you can create now that you are in a position to be able to do this? Somebody else also said, what if they don't like what I say? What if I raise my hand and I'm shot down? And so they don't say anything. I hear this from so many people. And I also hear it in particular from women and in particular who say, well, I want to be 100% sure that I'm right before I raise my hand. And my biggest concern here is that if you wait until you're 100% sure, you may never get a chance. And people would really benefit from this. So what if they don't like what we say? You could say something like this: I have an idea. Don't know if it's the right thing to say, but I would love your feedback to tell me how it could be improved. Sure, they may not like it, but wouldn't you be better off knowing why they don't like it so that you can make it even better? But you won't know that until you raise your hand and you say it. Some people say, I can't speak up, I might get fired. But what happens if you don't speak up? What is left unsaid? What is not moving the team forward because of this? We need more data to be absolutely sure. We need to be perfect. I was speaking with a hospital and they have this wonderful idea, do no harm. But it had morphed into this idea, this belief that we can't make any mistakes. There's a big difference between not making mistakes and do no harm. You might be doing harm by not acting, by not moving forward, even when you don't have all the information. I love this next one. I can't change anything because I'm just well, maybe you're just a individual or a manager or a VP. I've heard this coming from the executive teams. I've heard it come from a CEO who said, I can't change things because of whatever reason. That is an excuse, I think, that says somebody is, I don't want to make the effort. I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to take the chance that I might fail because it feels too dangerous and too risky for me to step forward. And then the last one, everyone needs to agree before we can move forward. One of my favorite leadership principles comes from Amazon that says disagree and commit. The idea is that everyone has great ideas. And if we waited till everybody agreed, the best ideas would be watered down to make sure that everybody was comfortable. Instead, how about if we disagree, but also when the decision is made, we commit to whatever that decision is, 100%. Because even if it wasn't my idea that was picked, I agree that I will back you 100% because the next time it may be my idea and I want to know that you have my back. So these are fundamental beliefs that we say to ourselves, and they can be so damaging. Take a look at the beliefs you have. Do an exercise with a team that you have, a class project that you may be working on, and say, what are the beliefs that are holding us back? And agree not to believe those things. And instead, identify the new beliefs that you have to adopt to move you forward. If you believe in this future and this disruptive change in this future, what beliefs do you have to have in order for that to come true? I'm going to close out by just a couple last ideas. One thing I would say is that great ideas have to have grit. These are the two inventors of the Post-it notes, one of the best accidental innovations ever to come to life. I love Post-it notes. I live my life around these. And the engineer had developed one glue that just didn't stick very well. It was a failure. And another scientist had a problem in that he had choir practice. He was a choir leader. And the pieces of paper to denote which hymns they were going to practice kept falling out of his hymnal. And they were at a random meeting, talked about this, and voila, they came up with this idea of Post-it notes. So they whipped up the batch, and just a little tidbit, the reason why it's yellow is because the print shop where they did this had extra free yellow paper that they could use. That's why they're yellow. But they whipped up a batch and gave it to the executive teams and said, look, isn't this great? And the executive team said, this is ridiculous. This is useless. Go away. They didn't give up. So they put those batches and put them on the executive assistants of all of those executives. And when those assistants ran out, they were clamoring to the executives, go, we need more of these wonderful things. And that's how Post-it notes were born. I tell this story because the best innovations are never easy. You go back into Edison's laboratory and how many times did he have to try filaments? We know this as engineers, we know this as scientists, we know this as leaders, that the changes worth fighting for are going to be hard. They're going to be a slog. They're going to be disruptive. So as you're thinking about this, my last few words of advice is to move out of your comfort zone, because this is where the magic happens. I drink my coffee and my tea in the mornings out of a mug that says life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And I try to do something every day that pushes me out of that comfort zone. It could be a new idea, it could be a new thing. I want my palms to be sweating a little bit because that's when I know that I am growing. And you know that you had been there. You know you had been there when you know that you've gone to the very edges. And I encourage you to go to the very, very edges of where you think you could sustain yourself. Go to that very edge, look over that edge and just go, whoa, that is crazy. That I can't go any further than that. And then take just one step back from that edge. Know that you're on safe ground, but stay at that edge. Don't go back to your comfort zone. Stay at that edge. Feel that kind of nervous feeling of looking over that edge, knowing where it is, but also know and have confidence that where you are safe. We all went to that edge in March. We were pushed to that very edge. We are still at that edge. And we are actually comfortable at it now. We have learned to not just survive, but to thrive with this disruption that was thrust upon us. Now imagine if you were to go out and create your own disruption, to create your own change, and you start feeling comfortable with being at that edge. So if you take nothing else away from today, and then we can open up a question Q&A here, disruption is an opportunity for change. Make no mistake about it. There is so much change that's out there, so many needs and problems that can be addressed. The world is full of those opportunities, and I wish you all the best in your journey of your disruption to go and look for those and to find that opportunity to be a leader. This is my contact information, and you can get the slides, you can get copies of the book for an ebook. If you go to my website, charleneli.com/Aberman, and you'll be able to find lots of other resources there, courses, handouts, information again. And I also encourage you to stay in touch. This is my contact information, and I do mean that. I put this contact information at the end of all of my talks. And so few people respond to me. I do mean that. I do enjoy hearing from you. What's working for you? Where are you on your journey? It's how I learn. And also, if I can be of service to help you think through some of those challenges, I really encourage that. All right, I'm going to leave that up there for a little bit and see if we have any questions that we have. Sam.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlene. That was very insightful. Our first question comes from Mark, and he says, do you consider that Apple is a disruptive organization? I think it is widely considered as disruptive, but it is also legendary for its lack of openness.
Yes. Okay. So openness, first of all, I do consider them to be a very disruptive organization. And the people there are really funny. They talk about how they always see themselves as individuals more disruptive than the organization. It tends to be very true. But they put themselves at like 9, 10, 11s and stuff like that. They're always at that very edge. It's consistently across the entire organization. They are not open to the world. They are very open internally. There was a really good article on Harvard Business Review a few months ago that talked about how it's a really fascinating look at how they organize themselves. It's a very functional organization. And so there's a lot of transparency about who is good at what and what is not working. And they're really brutally honest with each other about what's working and not. And they call each other, and there's tremendous accountability in the organization. But they are not open to the rest of the world. So there's a difference in terms of that openness. But if you go and see what that organization is like internally, it is a very transparent, very accountable organization. It's a great question too.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Dean Nicel, and he asks or says, I think that people think of disruptions as appearing quickly and out of nowhere and leading to significant change in a short period. Is this true, or can disruptions also be slow and steady?
Actually, the disruptions are really slow to happen. We think that they pop out of nowhere, and they were in a sort of birth mode for decades sometimes. So think about what am I thinking about? The cards that you swipe. I feel like I turned 50 and I can't remember the names anymore. The near field technologies that came out. Wi-Fi came out in World War II, so in the 50s and 60s. But it took decades for there to be an application of those technologies. And so the disruptions and innovations do feel like they pop out of nowhere. But you look at any of these developments, they have been formulating for years. I can't think of a single disruptive, meaningful innovation that popped out of nowhere. I was following Google from 1997, and they went public in 2003. That's a period of 5 to 6 years for them to really gain that. And they were just sort of formulating for many, many years in the backwaters of the internet. When I started covering them in 1999, I thought they were the best thing since sliced bread, but no one took them seriously. Even Facebook, huge trend coming along, and nobody took social media seriously until it was a serious force in our society. So you can see these trends coming from a long ways away. They're slow and they build up. And the key here is you never quite know what's going to be a hit. But you can do scenario planning, you can think about what the chances are in the future. But one of my favorite technologies right now is quantum computing. I don't understand quantum computing. I really don't know what it is. I know in theory what it is. I know what the capabilities of it are, and I'm extremely excited about it because we'll be able to take that power and do things with it that we never could have imagined that we're doing. We're up to, I think, 63 qubits or something right now. So it's just with every qubit, exponential amounts of computing power. But we have no idea what to do with it. So the key is if we can ask the right questions of how to use these technologies, then we can apply it. And the reason why it takes so long is that people and organizations change fairly slowly. Society changes fairly slowly. And because of that, the adoption of these new technologies and the uses of them is going to take time.
Thank you. There are no questions. Oh, there we go, Tony. From Tony, we have, you said disruptions are accelerated by challenging times. How do you see climate change as influencing disruption in business and technology?
Well, we know that climate change has been around for a long time. We've been talking about it for decades. And I think that the sense of urgency now has come. Again, people, until they're forced to move out of really physical ways, we see it right now in our everyday. We had orange skies here in San Francisco. We see hurricanes impacting our lives, the severe climate. And I think we're finally at a place now where leadership is willing to take on the sacrifices that need to be made. But I also think that's very interesting that we're also seeing now that our economies, our financial institutions, our infrastructure has evolved to also see opportunities around climate change. In the past, it was always framed in the sense of sacrifice. We're now seeing that it could be a significant driver in our economies and also to create jobs. That may be, again, being erased in other areas around automation and change. So when we think about things in that way, when we can look at change from a multidimensional perspective, in the past, climate was only talked about from a scientific perspective, from a consumer perspective of things that we have to do and things we have to stop doing or start doing that were going to be hard. We never talked about and put in place the opportunities to actually see the positive side of climate change too. And I think that's been the huge sea change just over the past 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. And from Nikki, we have, how disruptive were you when you began university? When in your life did your personal disruptive quotient develop the most, and what caused it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I'm obviously Asian American, and I was born and grew up in Detroit, where there are not very many people who look like me. So I felt like a disruptive force. My elementary school had no other people of color in it. My middle school, I was the only person of color. And so for me to feel like I fit in took a lot of that energy. And so I have felt for much of my life, early parts of my life, as a disruptive force simply by being. So that gave me a level of confidence of not quite ever fitting in. And then choosing to go into business as a woman, as a person of color in 1988 when I came out of school, that was, again, a fairly disruptive thing because there was nobody in leadership that looked like me. So to show up in a room as a young person, 22, 23 years old, of all these executives who were much older, male and white, and also they're 6 feet tall and I'm 5 feet tall, so tall, white, and male. It was really hard. And I learned early on that I had a voice. I was very lucky that one of my first managers came to me and said, I know there are good ideas, but you're not speaking up enough. If you don't speak up, we're never going to learn. We're never going to be the beneficiaries of your insight. And the way that he put it to me that way, it wasn't speak up because you're not talking enough. He put it as an obligation on me as a member of the team to put my best foot forward, even if I didn't know what the answer was, to at least ask questions, to speak up and be a presence in the room. So I have forever been grateful to him. And I still talk to him, remind him, like, you made a huge difference in my life. So those are formative experiences in my life, to surround myself and be fortunate enough to have leaders who encourage me, who they could see me pulling back. I'll be very honest, I suffer and I still struggle with imposter syndrome. I feel like my stuff isn't good enough. Is it going to be accepted by people? What if I raise my hand and go out there and write a blog post, do a video, and I make a mistake? What if I fail? And I need to be 100% perfect and be out there, put my game out there. Because it's so difficult being out there and being a thought leader, so to speak. And so I've learned over the years that that feeling, that tingly feeling of my palms sweating and my stomach churning is a good thing. I want that to be happening because when I'm doing that, I know I'm being at that edge. And every once in a while, yeah, it doesn't work out very well. But I have this confidence now that I'll be okay. And that's really where this comes from. Having fallen on my face enough times, picked myself up, dusted off the dirt and said, well, that wasn't very fun, but I'm okay. And when you do this enough times, you realize you can take a lot of risk and be okay. And that gives you even more confidence to keep pushing forward. So my biggest encouragement is to go out there and prepare yourself, take a lot of risks, fall on your face, pick yourself up, surround yourself with people who are going to give you a pat on the back and push you out there again. That's the best thing you could do. Surround yourself with really supportive people who will do that for you.
Thank you. Those are really powerful words. I'm sure we all can think of leaders who have inspired us as well, and how important that is. Our next question comes from Taylor. How do you get support for disruptive ideas? I was listening to an interview with Obama, and he was talking about the lack of support for the defund the police movement in the US and the lack of support stemming from fear of the phrasing of the idea. How does something grow organically, and what can we do to encourage this growth?
Yeah, that phrase, defunding the police, has taken on a life of its own. And I think it's correlated with this whole idea of reforming the police. And so I do believe that communications and the way that you phrase things makes a big difference. I think the goal in the end is still the same. We want to have a police force that is serving the needs of the community. And instead of focusing on that, we're focusing on these highly divisive ideas. And so you could say that from a disruption point of view, it's better to have those disruptive ideas to push the agenda, but it's not going to actually move you forward. So it's one thing to disrupt, to create that division. It's another thing to disrupt and make the change happen. And I focus on making the change happen. By default, it comes down to a fairly moderated point of view. It says that I can take this side and that side and bring them together so that we can come to some sort of agreement to move forward. Because if you try to say this side wins or that side wins, we're going to be fighting for a very, very long time. So again, what is the future we want to create? We want to create a place and a future where the police are actually serving the needs of that community, Let's define what those needs look like. Let's take a look at the police force that we have today. What needs to change because of that? That's a rational discussion. That's a realist discussion that has optimism at the core of it. So that's when I think about the political cycles that we're in, the societal injustices that we have, so much of it is based on, are we able to have these tough discussions, have these tough conversations, truly listen to each other so that we can come to agreement on what the common things that we want to have happen in the world. What are the commonalities that we have? And I wish that we would have more of those conversations. It takes leadership. And I fear that we don't have the leadership in our society, in our countries, to be able to have those kinds of discussions. We look at with great envy into Canada and say, you are having those discussions. You do have the leadership to have that. So all the power to you to continue that, because it's contingent on leaders having those tough conversations to move things forward.
Thank you. That was very well said. From Philip, we have, as you look on your spectrum of disruptors, are there certain industries where being a disruptor is an asset and certain industries where it is actually a liability? I work for a bank and I'm probably an 8 on your scale.
Oh, I feel for you. I work with a lot of banks, a lot of insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. So the banks in general, yeah, they tend to be very conservative, very slow moving, but there are pockets inside of banks, especially the ones dealing with digital experiences, internet banking, all the things around conversational technologies. Those are the areas where you want to focus on and try to maneuver yourself as quickly as possible into those areas, because you'll be surrounded by 8s then. But the rest of the organization is actually very conservative, built on conserving the way things work, because that's what banks do really well. They just are reliable, things don't break, you can depend on them. And so the idea of disruption is something they don't want. But when you talk to a bank and say, what if we were to think about disruption as not breaking things down and destroying things, but breaking things down to make them better? How do we make things better? You think about hackers. Hackers don't just break things. Hackers take the existing structures and ask this one simple question: how could we do this better? How could we do this better on behalf of our customers? And so I think any industry benefits from this perspective. Every industry has its disruptors. I can point to every single industry, and there is a huge spectrum of people who are not disruptive to disruptive. One of the most disruptive companies, CEOs I ever met, was the CEO of a sand business. I kid you not, sand. You know, the stuff you see in a sandbox or on the beach. And I'm like, how disruptive can sand be? And he said, well, we make sand, but we sell to distributors and manufacturers who then make glass. And glass is going through this huge revolution right now. Think about all the devices and the kind of hardened glass that you need to have, the material science that goes into that. And we have needed to go down deep into the supply chain and the customer distribution chain to understand what those needs look like and disrupt all the way back to the core components of sand. So I don't think any industry is immune from disruption. Every industry is being disrupted. Every industry has customers that are constantly changing, and some a lot faster than you would think on the surface.
Thank you for that. From Alexandra, we have, what is your advice when you feel stuck or uninspired in your leadership journey? How do you unstick yourself, reevaluate, and keep going?
Oh, that's a great question. Again, this is especially for people who may be stuck in a job that they feel like they're just running around in circles. They're on that hamster wheel and not really making much progress. I believe in the power of 2 feet. You have the 2 feet that can stand up and walk out of that situation. That is completely incumbent on you. And so to get unstuck, go back to that question that I talked about. How will you serve the world? How can you be useful? Where are the places where you want to have an impact? Again, there are so many problems in the world. If you don't feel like you're making a change in the place where you are, then start asking questions. I hear a lot of students and would-be entrepreneurs ask me, so what are the next big opportunities out there? And my first answer is, if I knew what those were, I wouldn't tell you. And second of all, this is an example. Follow a working parent, preferably a woman, around for a day. See the problems that they have. Pick any of those problems, solve them, and you have $1 billion business. They're not easy problems to solve. They're intractable and hard. How do I take care of 3-year-olds and a 5-year-old when I've got to do Zoom meetings all day long? I mean, these are hard, entrenched problems that we need to address as societies. And if we really want to tap into this workforce, incredible workforce of women who now take on by far the biggest part of the burden of childcare. And we don't have a good way of addressing that. So yeah, take on that problem if you want. But there are problems. Take a look around, and that will rejuvenate you, because when you can create change, that's like, it's just, when you fall in love with that change, when you fall in love with that future, you want to do nothing but be with that. You know what it's like to be in love. You just can't do anything but be with that person, be with that idea. So find something like that that you really could fall in love with.
Thank you. I'm still looking for my big idea to start a company, so I might email you after this to get some pointers.
Yeah. Oh, let me give you an example. I have a friend who graduated from Berkeley and was trying to go into Y Combinator. So what she did is she went through a whole bunch of industries and literally wrote down all the places where things could be changed, where there could be disruption. And she figured on accounting. Not exactly a really cool area, but she realized accounting was this area that was not tapped into, was completely distributed, and people had a strong need for better accounting services. But how do you do that at scale? And to use, how do you do accounting as a service? So she created her own group and has been doing great. And she goes, and she was very honest with me. She was like, hey, I wasn't really passionate about this. I systematically, methodically went through a whole bunch of opportunities to see which of these things could work, and did research on a bunch of them, narrowed it down to this, and then developed it. So yeah, she went and looked for the problems and systematically said which ones that she actually thinks she could be excellent at and solving. And she figured out this was the carrier for her. Indenaro is the name of the company, and Jessica Ma is her name. She's an incredible entrepreneur to read up on. Jessica, and last name is M-A-H.
Very cool. Thank you. So from Cynthia now, this is to build off of Taylor's question. How do we focus on the future that we want if disruptive ideas are so opposing to the status quo? How do you introduce these ideas when you're in an environment with a lower disruptive quotient than the idea you are proposing?
Yes. If you're in an environment, then you have to be very clear about what the top priorities are of the organization. Because any leader, any executive, and I'm very cognizant that Dean Isel is on the call here, that any organization is going to have 3 top priorities that they're focused on. There could be 8, but there is, in the end, it comes down to 3. And if what you're proposing isn't in line with one of those 3, it won't matter. So if you can take your idea and be in line with what you think the organization is trying to do, then you will have an audience. If you can, so I always frame, if you have a disruptive idea, talk about how that idea is going to help you achieve, as an organization, one of the top 3 goals of your top organizational executives. Because if it's not on their plan, they won't care. But if it is on their plan, they'll be all ears. They all want to know, like, hey, you have an idea of how to go through this roadblock? Tell me more about that. Versus, we're focused on this and you want to go over to this area? Tell me how that is related back to here. And it may be, but you need to draw those connective tissues. The really hard thing is if you believe in a future that they don't see, then you have to be able to create a picture of what that future, that alternative reality, or even just create a future to help them lift their heads up from the current customers today. A lot of executives don't want to think about the future because it's unknown. And so their biggest problem is they're focused only on today and never on those opportunities. So create that future customer. I keep talking about future customers. Create that picture, create that scenario, write the stories of what that future could look like. paint that picture, because it's the only way you'll be able to move them away from these current customers and the status quo of today.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question comes from Jeremy. And he says, what would you say is the relationship between disruption and stability in organizations? Is it possible to be continuously disruptive, or is it perhaps somewhat of a cycle in which opportunities for disruption can be pursued once some kind of stability is achieved?
That's a fantastic question. And what we find in disruptive organizations, they're not continuous all the time. They go through cycles. Okay, we disrupt, and then we gather everyone and go, okay, is everyone here? We just went through a huge phase. Everybody here? Okay, great. Let's go again. And they disrupt again. The difference is how long those phases take. In disruptive organizations, those phases could take weeks, days, hours, especially in agile organizations. They say, you know, how long is it going to take for you to do this next piece of work so we can make a decision? They go, 2 hours. Okay, we'll get back together in 2 hours and we'll make a decision then. Versus traditional organizations, because people are in these silos and because their calendars are packed because they're working on 15 different projects. Okay, we had this great meeting. When can we next get together so we can take the next step? And they look at their calendars and they say, 2 weeks. Okay, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks. I also worked with an organization that said, you know, we did this whole disruptive thing. We all came together. We did this whole innovation thing. We pushed it into the market. It was fantastic. And we were exhausted from it. We're still recovering from it. And I go, I get it. You need some recovery time after a big, huge effort. How long ago was this? And he goes, oh, that was just 2 years ago. And I went, 2 years and you're still recovering? That's not good. The market has moved on. You know, you need to be thinking about how we build more resilience into the organization so that we can take on these challenges to be able to move at the speed of the customers, not at the speed of our calendars. So I look at this to say, you do need to have stability, but the stability that you need is created through process, through structure, through everybody knowing how things are going to work. Because when you have that stability, you're not trying to figure out how we're going to work together. We know how we're going to work together. Now we can spend 100% of our energy on that disruptive idea. What I find in other organizations, they don't know how to do interdepartmental meetings, how to make decisions when there are 18 different stakeholders. How do we actually move forward? Who even needs to be in the room? Those organizations don't do well with disruption because they're figuring out just how to even get together to make these decisions. Disruptive organizations are incredibly well run. They're incredibly well organized. Contrary to popular belief, it's counterintuitive. They have a lot of process, good process that allows them to focus on the future. I go into Google, I go into Apple, I go into Amazon. They have a ton of process and rituals and routines that they follow religiously. You may have heard of the FAQ and the press release from the future at Amazon, 6-page, 1-page press release, 6-page FAQ. That's how they make decisions across every single innovation that they have. That's the single process that they follow. And they follow it religiously. So there's no question about how new ideas get pitched. You follow the 1-page press release and the FAQ. So that's, and so when I walk into organizations, one of the first things I ask about is, do you know who your future customer is? What's your strategy to get to them? And then show me your dashboard that shows that you're making progress on that journey. If you can't answer me those 3 questions, then you're not going to have a good chance of being able to be disruptive because you don't have the fundamentals locked down. So yeah, stability can come through process and structure and governance. And it's just the opposite of what people think disruptive actually means.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really cool idea of sort of like a dynamic stability almost to build that disruption.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question comes from Krish, and he asks, is diversity important for disruption, and what should organizations do earnestly to harness diversity?
There has been endless amounts of research that show diverse teams actually create better teams, better decisions, better outcomes. There's no question about that. And yet, despite that, we continuously have problems with having diverse teams. We blame it on the fact that the pipeline isn't there. We say that it's the fact that people aren't ready for promotions. I look at this one factor, which is the executive index. If you look at all the people coming in, and you say like it's 20% white men, 20% white women, whatever that number is, when you have that recruiting level, is it reflected in the management structure? And if it's not, then you have a promotion problem. You're not promoting at the level that you would expect people to be promoted at. Because everyone's coming in at the same level, but they're not being promoted at the same level. And so you see men indexing at 1.4 compared to that entry level, white women. So white men at 1.4, white men at 1.0, men of color a little bit below that, 0.8, 0.9, and women of color at 0.5, 0.6 of their index. We see a significant problem. There's an intersectionality of a double jeopardy of women of color. And so knowing this is data. Collect the data. See what you're doing. Look at your promotion practices. Look at your team makeups. Look for all the unconscious bias and microaggressions that may be happening that you may not even know about. And really have these tough conversations about what does it mean to be diverse? How do we promote that? How do we move beyond just issues of diversity, but to practice true inclusion and a sense of belonging? Because when you have that, then the diversity will be addressed, because you will realize that we don't have a diverse perspective and we crave it, we want it to be the best team possible. It's not something you do because you're forced to make a number. You do it because you want to do the best for the customers. You want to solve this problem in the most innovative, creative way possible. So that's why I want to look for the diverse perspectives.
Awesome, thank you. So it looks like that is all the time we have for questions. So it looks like Taylor got cut off. We might have to send Charlene an email. Thank you for all of your insights, Charlene. It's very helpful. And I'm now going to pass it off to Dean Nysel for some closing remarks.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Charlene, that was incredible. So I've read your book twice so far. And I'm going to recommend everybody, you have an opportunity to download the book, and you need to take advantage of that. This is the kind of book that I think you need to keep going back to remind yourself over and over a lot of the concepts that you've heard of today. So it is worthwhile, and I think we just kind of saw the tip of the iceberg of what you'll discover in the book in this evening's presentation. I just want to relate it a little bit to kind of a journey we've been on for a number of years here in our faculty. So I know a lot of you know, of course, that we are in our 200th year as a university. What a lot of you probably don't realize is that we're in our 150th year of the birth of the engineering discipline at McGill University as well, starting with the mining engineering program, which is now the oldest in North America. But in recent years, we've been, it's wonderful to look backward, but we've been looking forward. And in looking forward, we have a wonderful group of volunteers that make up our faculty advancement board, a number of the representatives who are here, and one happens to be the partner to Charlene. And this group, actually with Alex Conliffe playing a leadership role in it, came up with a statement for what we aspire to be in the future. And the statement is as follows: our mission is to prepare globally minded professionals who are equipped to solve the problems that matter. And I just want to relate it to a few things that Charlene was saying today. So it's really important to have, of course, the global mindset, this mindset of understanding everything that is out there, things that are going on around you, and the opportunities that presents for you to make an impact. So that's really incredible. But if you want to make that difference, you need to be equipped. And I think that part of what we learned tonight is that maybe one of the important points that you need to think about in terms of your own preparation and the way that we can support you in it is how to adopt that disruption mindset. So what is that mindset that will equip you to find those opportunities to actually make a difference through your career, your practice, wherever it might take you? We also focus on the problems that matter. And I just want to relate this back to Charlene's comment about passion. The problems that matter, I think, are the ones that you can identify through your passion, what it is that you want to be able to achieve through your career. Charlene said earlier today in a brief conversation that she actually doesn't love writing. And so the passion isn't about sitting down and writing. The passion is, I think, maybe Charlene can correct me if I'm wrong here, the passion is what you can do through the writing. So what's the end goal? What's the difference that you can make? It's not about the activity, it's about what you're committing yourself to do. I think Charlene has shown that she has an incredible passion for translating these ideas and sharing them to others and making a big difference in their lives by hopefully setting them off on a new path. The other thing I like to say is that we often define ourselves as problem solvers, particularly engineers define themselves that way. I like a broader interpretation of problems. My impression, maybe the data doesn't bear this out, but my impression is that some of the most disruptive things that have happened are not because somebody handed a problem to somebody to solve. It's because somebody saw an untapped opportunity or potential. And that when they identified that potential, they filled that void and it led to incredible things. So not just the intended solution to a given problem, it actually kind of filled that and then led to so many other transformative changes in society. You look back and say, well, why didn't we define that as a problem to start with? And again, I think it is through perhaps a disruptive mindset. If you're not just looking to sit and wait for people to hand you on a platter a problem that is to be solved, and that's great if that happens to you, but perhaps if you're a little bit more broad-minded to actually look for the opportunities where you can translate your motivation and make things happen and make a really disruptive impact on the world out there. And I want to say that a big part of what we're trying to do at McGill in recent years through our Engine initiative, which is to give people the opportunity to actually put their ideas into action, translate their ideas, maybe even create a startup out of it, or even directly related to tonight's event is our Empower initiative, which is about leadership. Not leadership from the top, but leadership from within, to actually figure out if you have what it takes and to provide you with the skills for what it takes to actually make a difference. So we want to make sure that you can challenge those very beliefs that you seem to hold right now that might be holding you back. So if we can help you challenge those beliefs, develop the skills to overcome them, then I think, as they say, the world is your oyster. You can go very, very far. So again, I just want to thank Charlene for a wonderful presentation tonight. I want to thank Alex as well for the opening remarks and for all the work that you've done as well to make this happen tonight. And Cynthia for all the work that you put behind as well for organizing the event. And again, note of thanks again to the Aberman family to make this kind of seminar possible, and many other donors, alumni, donors from all over the place who provide the support that we need to really bring these kinds of events that I hope will be pivotal moments in your lives and your careers from this point forward. So thank you again, everybody. It's been a wonderful evening, and I couldn't have asked for a more inspiring talk. So thank you again, Charlene. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks.
Charlene, that was fantastic. Thank you very much.
It was
You're
great.
so welcome.
Cynthia, are we able to share the link to everybody that was here so that they can go to Charlene's website and then access the book?
I have everyone who attended, so I can email that out after, yes.
Great, that'd be wonderful. Thank you. Charlene, thanks again, as always.
Thank
And
you.
Taylor, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was
No, it's fine. Those are great questions. They kept coming in. And I tried to answer the last one too by chat. So hopefully Taylor got it.
I saw it. Thank you.
All right, good.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good evening. Stay safe, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.